Hey everyone, welcome back. This story is based on the true events that inspired one of the scariest horror franchises ever made. We're heading to Connecticut, the quiet suburb where Ed and Lorraine Warren built their occult museum, and where one particularly ghoulish case changed the history of horror. What's the scary part? The real-life Valak looked nothing like the creepy nun you've seen on screen. Subscribe to the channel and follow along, because by the end of this video, you'll know the truth about Valac, why Hollywood turned her into a nightmare nun, and how that legend grew into a billion-dollar horror universe. It starts on an ordinary street in an ordinary town. The kind of place where the houses all look alike, where the sound of sprinklers at dusk is as predictable as the mailman at noon. In one of those houses lives Kate, a schoolteacher in her 30s, who has a habit of grading papers late into the night at her kitchen table. There's nothing extraordinary about her life. She wakes up, feeds the cat, commutes to school, and comes home to an empty but peaceful house. Kate isn't a thrill seeker. She doesn't watch horror movies. She prefers documentaries and cooking shows. On weekends, she visits her parents. On Sundays, she goes to church. The most unsettling thing in her life is a dripping faucet she keeps forgetting to fix. If you met her, you'd think she was the last person who would ever become the center of a supernatural story. One night, while grading essays about the American Revolution, she hears a noise from the attic, a soft shuffle like something dragged across the floor. She assumes it's a raccoon. Ordinary life continues, but the noise doesn't stop. Over the next week, it grows bolder. Footsteps overhead while she's watching TV. A sudden crash like a box falling over. But when she climbs the ladder and shines a flashlight around, nothing is out of place. This is where the Catholic demonology playbook begins. The church has always said demons are not random shadows. They are organized. Each one has a name, a rank, a purpose. Some whisper temptations. Some infest houses, making walls creak, objects fall, pets cower. And in the worst cases, some possess, stepping inside a human body as if it were a suit of clothes. What Kate is experiencing, if we use theological language, is infestation. A warning stage, a signal that something wants to be noticed. Most of us shrug off creaks and crashes. Houses settle, pipes expand and contract. But what makes Kate's story terrifying is how quickly the ordinary can turn uncanny. When her coffee mug slides 2 inches across the counter without her touching it, she laughs nervously and blames gravity. When it happens again the next night, with her cat hissing at the empty air, it's no longer funny. And that is the first step. Make the audience feel this could happen in my house. In earlier centuries, this is where the priest would step in, quietly, discreetly. Exorcisms were not performed for the public. They were private, almost secret rituals, attended only by clergy and family. The prayers were ancient, the gestures codified. Holy water, the sign of the cross, relics pressed to the afflicted person's forehead. But in the mid-20th century, something changed. A case in Maryland involving a boy who seemed possessed leaked into the press. Journalists covered it. People whispered about it in grocery store lines. Suddenly, the rite of exorcism was no longer just for dusty theology books. It was something the public could imagine and fear. Kate, frightened but rational, calls her parish priest. He is kind but cautious. He recommends more prayer, a house blessing, maybe a check for carbon monoxide leaks. The church moves slowly because most claims have natural explanations. But Kate's nights grow worse. Scratches appear on the walls. Her bed shakes at 3 a.m., the so-called witching hour that folklore says mocks the hour of Christ's death. She stops inviting friends over. She is tired, jumpy, isolated. And this is where the exorcist effect kicks in, not just in Kate's life, but in our culture. When William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist hit bookstores in 1971 and then theatres in 1973, it was like setting off a cultural bomb. People fainted in theatres, lines wrapped around city blocks. Newspapers ran stories about audiences vomiting or leaving early in shock. For the first time, exorcism wasn't a secret. It was spectacle. Suddenly, everyone knew the rules. The Latin prayers, the holy water, the spinning heads, the battle between priest and demon. Exorcism became a pop culture script that everyone could follow, and Hollywood never looked back. Kate watches The Exorcist on TV one night, thinking maybe it will make her feel silly for being afraid. Instead, it makes her worse. Every creak in the house now feels like a prelude to possession. She imagines voices whispering her name, imagines waking up levitating over her bed, and the audience watching this story feels a chill because the setup is so relatable. Ordinary house, not a haunted castle. Ordinary woman, not a horror heroine. Ordinary noises, not obvious special effects. The point is not just to teach demonology, it's to put the viewer in Kate's slippers. We see Kate making tea at midnight, camera lingering on the kettle while a faint thud echoes upstairs. We see her ignore it once, twice, until the third time she can't. She climbs the attic ladder slowly, breathing hard. The attic is still. Dust motes dance in the flashlight beam. Nothing happens. She laughs at herself. Then, just as she turns to climb down, 2 knocks from the dark corner. The scene cuts to black. This is how you weave theology into story. You let the audience feel it before you explain it. Only afterward do you bring in the idea that this isn't random, that Catholic tradition says infestation leads to oppression, oppression leads to possession. Kate doesn't know that yet. All she knows is that her ordinary life is cracking. And that is where the fear truly begins. By the time the Conjuring films arrived decades later, audiences had already been trained by stories like Kate's and by decades of exorcism cinema to recognize the signs. 3 knocks at 3 a.m., crucifixes falling from walls, children speaking in voices not their own. The films didn't have to explain much. They could show you a rosary breaking, and you'd know exactly what it meant. Evil is near. Kate's story is a bridge between the real folklore, the quiet, hidden rituals, and the Hollywood version, the loud, terrifying showdowns. She reminds us that before it was a billion-dollar franchise, before there were memes of Annabelle sitting on a couch, there was just a person alone in a house, hearing something move where nothing should be. And that ordinariness is what makes the horror stick. It always begins with something small. A photograph on the wall that seems a little too crooked. A crucifix that you're sure was hanging straight last night, now tilted at a strange angle. In the Warren household, those little shifts were never just home maintenance issues. They were the first murmurs of a calling. Ed Warren would notice them first. He had an eye for detail, sharpened from years of painting houses and later painting canvases of haunted places. A rosary chain caught in a draft, a candle that burned down too fast, a story told by a neighbour that ended with, and then we heard footsteps. These were not proof, not yet. But to Ed, they were hints, patterns forming in the corner of vision. He would mention them to Lorraine over coffee, casual, almost joking. You know, if I didn't know better, I'd say the devil's working overtime in Monroe. Lorraine would smile politely, set down her teacup, and shake her head. She had lived long enough with Ed's obsessions to know that the world was always a little haunted in his eyes. She could rationalize the small things. Houses settle, wind howls, drafts sneak under the door. But she also had that inner stillness, that clairvoyant hum she claimed let her sense the difference between a creaking floorboard and a cry for help. Even when she dismissed Ed out loud, some part of her was already listening. To the audience, to us, these are not random household quirks. They are the first beats of a drum that is about to grow louder. The crooked picture frame, the story at the diner about the family down the road whose child talks to an imaginary friend, the invitation slipped under the Warrens' door asking them to visit a frightened couple. These are narrative threads beginning to weave together. We can feel where this is going long before Ed and Lorraine admit it to themselves. The Warrens' uncanny gift wasn't just in noticing the first signs. It was in knowing how to present them. They turned the occult into a kind of theatre. Ed began calling himself a demonologist, a word so rare in 1960s America that it practically glowed with mystery. Lorraine was the clairvoyant, the one with the second sight. Together, they were more than a husband and wife. They were a brand, a team that gave shape to invisible fears. The props were part of the act, though they would never call it an act. Holy water, relics, crucifixes, tape recorders, cameras, each one placed carefully on the table when they visited a home. Even before the first prayer was spoken, the ritual had begun. The family would watch, wide-eyed, as Ed unpacked the gear and Lorraine walked slowly from room to room, murmuring under her breath. The Warrens didn't just confront the uncanny, they staged it, turning fear into a shared event that could be documented, analysed, and later retold. And when the lights were back on and the danger supposedly gone, Ed would paint the house. Literally. He would make a sketch or a full oil painting of the haunted location, preserving its menace on canvas. It was evidence, yes, but also branding. A visual signature that said, we were here, we faced this darkness, and we lived to tell the story. What made these first uncanny signs matter to ordinary families was the Warrens' willingness to show up. The Catholic Church could be slow to act, weighed down by bureaucracy, documentation, layers of approval, before an exorcist could even be assigned. The Warrens were fast. You called. They came. They didn't require you to prove your faith or fill out forms. They walked through your front door carrying both a crucifix and a tape recorder. That immediacy turned the abstract terror into something survivable. Parents who had been losing sleep for weeks would break down just seeing Lorraine close her eyes and read the house. Children would cling to Ed's legs as though he were a firefighter arriving at the scene of a blaze. These were the small moments that transformed the Warrens from curious hobbyists into something more. They became America's unofficial paranormal first responders. But there was an unsettling edge to this too. When you open your door to the Warrens, you are also opening your door to a narrative that might never leave. The story becomes theirs to tell, at lectures, in books, in interviews. Sometimes families later wished they had kept the haunting private. But in that first night, when the noises are still echoing in the hallway and something scratches on the wall, the Warrens are exactly who you want to see. The crooked picture frames and phantom footsteps didn't stay contained to Monroe. Ed and Lorraine began traveling, turning their case files into a portable gallery of the uncanny. They projected slides of ghost photos onto high school auditorium walls. They played eerie recordings to rapt college crowds. They stood at podiums and told stories that started with small rational details, a smell of sulfur, a pet that wouldn't enter a room, and ended with priests, levitations, and full-blown confrontations with evil. For the audience at those lectures, the first uncanny signs were the most chilling part. Anyone could imagine hearing a strange knock or finding a chair moved overnight. These details felt real, plausible, like something that might have happened in your house. By the time Ed described the exorcism, the listeners were already there with him, primed to believe because the story had begun in a place they recognized. This was the Warrens' genius, turning private dread into communal ritual. Each lecture was a mini exorcism for the crowd, purging fear by naming it, by giving it shape and a villain. The families whose stories were told might not always have felt liberated. Some later accused the Warrens of exaggeration. But the audiences left convinced that evil was real, and that there were people brave enough to face it. Looking back, these first uncanny signs seem inevitable. The tilted crucifix, the restless whisper at the edge of hearing. They were leading here all along. Ed and Lorraine Warren didn't just respond to hauntings. They built a framework that told us how to interpret them. They turned the random knocks of an old house into the opening notes of a cosmic drama. For us as viewers, that's what makes their story so compelling. We know that when Lorraine pauses at the foot of a staircase and says she feels something, it's not just a line. It's the signal that the narrative is shifting from domestic drama to spiritual warfare. The Warrens may have rationalized some of these details at first, may have smiled them away over coffee, but the audience never does. We lean forward. We know what's coming. And so, the first uncanny signs serve their narrative purpose. They are the thin edge of the wedge, the thing that keeps you watching because you sense that the real battle has not yet begun. Ed and Lorraine step into frame, their presence both comforting and ominous. If they are here, something is very wrong, and that means the story is about to get good or terrifying. Usually both. The story never begins with thunder. It begins with something small you can ignore. A framed photograph tips forward on its own. Keys left on the counter appear inside a shoe. A child's toy turns up facing a new direction. Each event is explainable in isolation. Air currents, bad memory, a roommate's harmless prank. But folklore teaches a different habit of mind. When objects repeat strange behavior, people suspect a presence using the object as a vessel. The belief is ancient and oddly practical. Spirits, if they exist, need leverage. Walls are too broad, weather too impersonal. An object is tactile, intimate, portable. It travels between rooms and hands. It stores stories. So the repetition begins. A cloth doll sits on a sofa, its stitched smile fixed beneath button eyes. One night it's angled toward the hallway, the next night toward the kitchen. The roommates laugh, move it back, and forget. A week later, a note appears. Childlike letters scrawled on a torn scrap. Help me. There is no paper of that type in the apartment. They shrug again. A prank, a coincidence, anything but a pattern. Yet the notes repeat, sometimes tucked beneath a cushion, sometimes slid halfway under a door, always brief, always pleading. Repetition builds the case. Each small event is a thread. Together, they become rope. Night after night, sounds pick up. A soft shuffle across linoleum when the roommates are in bed. The tick of something tapping the table. The faintest fabric whisper, as if a hem brushed wood. One roommate starts marking the doll's position with a piece of tape on the table edge. In the morning, the tape is wrong. The doll has moved an inch, then 3, then to the window. They laugh again, but the laughs are thinner now. No one else notices. The landlord says the building settles. Friends suggest stress, exams, overwork. The pattern continues. Annabelle. Fact versus film. Cloth doll versus porcelain icon. According to the account later told in lectures and case notes, 2 nursing students received a cloth doll as a gift. It looked comforting. Raggedy Ann, a floppy red yarn-haired emblem of innocence. That harmlessness is crucial to the tension, because horror here is not spectacle, but drift. The doll does not leap. It inches. The roommates begin to test reality. They lock the bedroom door and place the doll outside. In the morning, it sits on the bed. They place it on the bed and lock the doll inside. In the afternoon, it waits in the living room chair. A neighbor can't corroborate a break-in. Nothing is stolen. Nothing is moved, except the doll. Intensity increases. The notes change from help me to help us. The plural is icy. It implies a collective. It implies that the object is not alone, or that the writer speaks for more than one presence, or worse, that the house itself is now included in the plea. A boyfriend jokes about the roommate with red yarn hair, stays over to prove a point, and wakes with thin scratches across his chest, as if drawn by small, determined fingers. He insists he must have bumped something in the night. He shows the marks to a doctor. They look like abrasions from a cat. He does not own a cat. No one believes the roommates fully, not even the roommates. Belief would require action, and action would make it real. They choose strategies instead. Bag the doll, move the doll, ignore the doll. At dinner, they tell the story again and watch friends laugh, then watch the laughter fade when the details pile up, the locked door, the notes, the scratches. The friends offer advice that is not advice. Get more sleep. It's an old building. Throw it out. They try to throw it out. The trash lid claps shut. The can sits by the curb. In the morning, the can is lighter, the bag is missing, and the doll is once again on the chair, angled toward the hall. Intensity increases again. The roommates place flour on the floor to catch footprints. In the morning, there are no footprints. The doll has moved anyway. They set up a camera, low budget, a single angle facing the living room. The file corrupts overnight. The next night, the video works, but shows nothing out of the ordinary except a moment at 3:07 a.m. when the frame jitters slightly and the doll's head tilts a fraction of an inch. It could be compression. It could be the lens. It could be their nerves. It could be everything at once. No one believes, and because no one believes, the pattern deepens. The doll seems to prefer thresholds, doorways, hall entrances, the spot where kitchen tile meets carpet. The roommates begin to mark those places with chalk crosses. The chalk smears. They begin to speak aloud to the air, not prayer exactly, but negotiation. Stop it. Leave us alone. We don't want this. The apartment feels denser, as if the air has picked up humidity without moisture. The smell of the room changes. Not rot, not perfume, something like dust warmed by an old lamp. Intensity increases yet again. The boyfriend falls asleep on the couch and snaps awake choking, as if a hand is pressing lightly against his throat. There is nobody there. The doll sits at his feet. He throws it across the room. It lands with a soft thud, and when he looks again, it seems closer, though he cannot swear to it. He leaves the apartment at 2 a.m., pretending he forgot work in the morning. The roommates call for help, not the police, because what is the crime? Not the university, because what is the policy? They call someone who will treat the pattern as a pattern. A visit is arranged. The visitors do not wear collars, but they speak the language of ritual. They go room to room. They interview. They listen. They tell the roommates what the roommates fear. This is not a little girl, not a grief-sodden presence asking for a hug. If anything supernatural is involved, the doll is not possessed by a child spirit. It is being used. The object is a decoy to attract permission. The doll is removed. A glass case is prepared. A sign will be printed. Warning, positively do not open. The roommates feel relief immediately, like a fever breaking. That relief is part of the pattern too. Objects lift not only fear, but consent. So long as the object is present, the agreement remains active. Without it, the room feels wider. And yet the story does not end there, because stories do not end when safety returns. They end when meaning settles. Meaning takes time. The film version of this chapter removes time. It cannot afford to wait. So Annabelle becomes porcelain. Lacquered eyes, cracked cheek, hair smoothed into a sculpted braid. Porcelain does not flop. It angles. It throws highlights like a blade. The doll becomes a visual argument. You should be afraid. The camera glides. The strings whine. The possession escalates with optical certainty. But in the cloth doll tale, fear is the argument itself, and disbelief is the counter-argument that keeps the fear alive. Why props become icons: readability, silhouette, and marketing. Every repetition above does two jobs. It scares the characters, and it trains the audience. By the fifth move, you can spot the doll anywhere in the frame. By the seventh note, you can recognize those letters without reading them. By the third threshold sighting, a doorway becomes ominous even if empty. This is how props become icons. Readability first, silhouette second, then reproducibility. Readability is the speed at which a shape declares itself. The cloth doll's circle head, triangle dress, and yarn arcs read quickly, but they read as comfort. To flip that reading without dialogue, storytellers rely on repetition. The same face in the wrong place at the wrong time becomes a pattern the brain cannot file under innocent. The princess dress in a flooded basement, the teddy bear on the attic beams, the cloth doll facing the door again. The wrongness accumulates until it becomes legible as danger. Silhouette is what remains when details are stripped. The film's porcelain doll wins here. Hard geometry, reflective eyes, angular jaw, because even in low light the outline chills. The cloth doll is mushy by design, its outline a friendly blob. This is why the cinematic escalation swaps materials. What was once a narrative pattern becomes a visual shorthand. You do not need 5 repetitions in a movie poster. You need a face that does the repetition for you when you glance at it. Marketing is the afterlife of repetition. Once an object's silhouette reads as fear, you can put it on a poster, a thumbnail, a mug, a Halloween aisle, and the reaction is pre-trained. The audience has been conditioned across micro moments: the apartment chair, the doorway, the floor flower test, the soft thud at 3:07 a.m. They bring that conditioning into the theatre, then out of the theatre and onto the internet, where memes finish the job. The icon becomes a unit of meaning, independent of its original scene. And yet beneath the icon, beneath the porcelain gloss and the meme, the cloth doll's logic still works. Strange events repeat. Intensity increases. No one else believes. The tension climbs because disbelief isolates. If the roommates were instantly believed, if the priest arrived with sirens, if a crowd gathered with cameras, the dread would ventilate. But in this kind of haunting, the walls lean in precisely because the world leans away. This is why cursed objects persist in folklore. They make anxiety manageable. You can point to the thing. They also make anxiety unspeakable. You sound foolish pointing to a thing. This paradox keeps the story vibrating between secrecy and confession, between "I need help" and "no one will take this seriously." In that gap, tension compounds. By the time the glass case is bolted and the warning sign goes up, the audience has been taught everything they need to feel the chill on sight. The object is now a portable threshold. Wherever it appears, the room divides into before and after, safe and not safe. The case travels to a museum. The story travels to a lecture. The lecture travels to a film. The film travels to a poster. The poster travels to your timeline. Each migration is another repetition, and repetition is the method by which folklore becomes myth. If you want to map the chapter's pulse beat by beat, it's this: a move by inches, laughed off; a note, explained away; 2 notes, a plural, a chill; a scratch, an excuse, a doctor's shrug; flower on the floor, no footprints, movement anyway; a camera that fails, a camera that barely catches a tilt; a night choke; a soft thud; a door that was locked; a phone call for help that isn't official; but is exactly what belief looks like when institutions have no form to fill. A box, a case, a sign, and the sudden relief that proves the tension was real. Everything after, the porcelain face, the iconic poster, the jump scare edit, is both adaptation and admission. Adaptation, because cinema needs speed and silhouette. Admission, because the film tacitly concedes that the slow repetitions of the cloth doll were the original engine of fear. Without those repetitions, there is no icon to market, no meme to remix, no warning sign to place in a museum. The porcelain is a mask. The cloth was the voice. And if you're wondering why people argue about what really happened, hoax, hysteria, haunting, it is because disbelief is built into the machinery. No one else notices or believes is not an accident. It is the pressure that forges the legend. The roommate's embarrassment, the boyfriend's rationalizing, the doctor's cat theory. These are the counterweights that keep the scale trembling. Take them away, and the story drops into certainty and dies. Keep them in play, and the story vibrates. Vibration is suspense. So the chapter ends not with proof, but with containment. The doll behind glass, the warning in red letters, the room finally exhaling. Containment is a promise the audience understands viscerally. If evil can be boxed, we can walk away, but we never quite do. The box is a prop. The pattern is the thing. And patterns, once taught, repeat wherever a familiar face appears in the wrong place at the wrong time. On a nightstand, in a photograph, on a theatre wall, on a tiny rectangle glowing in your hand. Strange events repeat. Intensity increases. No one else notices or believes. That is how a cloth doll becomes Annabelle, and how Annabelle becomes an icon. The candle sputtered as if something had just breathed across the room. The air was no longer neutral. It pressed in like wet cloth, thick enough to taste. This was no suggestion of evil. This was its arrival. At first, there was only the sound. Not a footstep, not a knock, but a low hiss that seemed to come from the walls themselves, like steam leaking from a cracked pipe. Then the shadows elongated, stretching unnaturally across the floorboards until they converged at the chapel door. And then she was there. Valac did not enter with a scream. She simply was, as if she had always been standing there, waiting for everyone to notice. The black habit framed a face so white it seemed to glow with its own corpse light, the kind of pallor that makes your stomach flip before your brain catches up. Her eyes were not merely dark, but hungry. Two voids that drank in the candlelight and gave nothing back. The crucifix on the far wall flipped upside down with a groan of metal, and every candle leaned toward her, as if dragged by some unseen tide. The sound that followed was worse than a scream, a wet, guttural growl that rattled the wooden pews. Lorraine staggered backward, one hand clamped over her rosary, the other instinctively raised in a cross. She was the one person in the room who had seen this figure before. In dreams, in visions, always at the edge of perception. But seeing Valac fully manifested made her feel as if someone had driven ice into her chest. "Don't look at her," Ed barked, his voice cracking with fear. But it was already too late. Valac moved without walking. The black hem of her habit did not swish or drag. It simply hovered, gliding forward in soundless increments. The candles blew out one by one, plunging the room into an almost perfect dark, except for her glowing face. The silence that followed was worse than noise. You could hear your own heartbeat. And then you couldn't, because something was drowning it out. A hiss of laughter. Not human laughter, something layered, as though 2 or 3 voices were speaking at once, overlapping, mocking. It echoed from the ceiling, the walls, the floorboards, everywhere at once until it felt like the entire house was alive and laughing. Lorraine's knees gave way, and she fell against the pew. She could see the face more clearly now, The mouth stretched too far, the teeth pointed and glistening as if wet. It was the smile of a predator who has already decided you cannot run far enough. The wind came next, from nowhere, from everywhere. Hymn books flew open and slapped shut, their pages riffling so fast they sounded like wings beating. The crucifix tore from the wall and crashed at Ed's feet. Valac tilted her head and spoke. The words a guttural snarl that made the Latin sound profane. You cannot save them. Ed grabbed the nearest vial of holy water and flung it toward her. The droplets hissed as they hit the air, evaporating before they could touch her. Lorraine tried to speak a prayer, but her throat locked as though someone had seized it. Then the real violence began. The pews skidded across the floor with bone-snapping force, pinning Ed against the altar. His breath left him in a single grunt. Lorraine was yanked by her hair, dragged backward across the stone floor until she hit the steps of the sacristy. She clawed at the ground, but her nails scraped away useless splinters. Valac did not rush. She advanced like a shadow crossing the moon, slow, deliberate, savouring every second. Lorraine's vision began to blur. The nun's face was the only thing she could see clearly now. Those black eyes widening, swallowing her whole. There was no music, no screams left, just the sound of blood pounding in her own ears and the faint hiss of candles reigniting one by one, not with light, but with black flame. This was no ordinary haunting. This was a declaration of war. For a moment, Lorraine thought she saw the real Valac, not the nun, but the thing beneath the image. A childlike silhouette riding a serpent, its mouth full of too many teeth. Then the image blinked back into the pale, grinning nun, as if mocking her for even daring to remember the truth. Faith will not hold, Valac whispered, closer now, almost nose to nose. You are already mine. Lorraine could not move. Ed could not breathe. The entire room had become a trap, the air too heavy to scream, the darkness too thick to fight. And for one endless second, it seemed as though Valac would simply step forward, dissolve the distance, and snuff them out like the last candle in the room. Then, a sound, a single fragile prayer. Lorraine forced it out, syllable by syllable, her voice breaking but rising, louder until it became a shout. The air trembled. For the first time, Valac stepped back, her grin faltering. The battle was not won, but the spell was cracked. The candles flared white. The crucifix on the floor glowed faintly, humming with heat. Ed broke free from the pew and grabbed Lorraine by the arm, dragging her upright. Valac let out one final sound, not a scream, but something worse. A long, shrill, rising hiss that scraped the air like nails on glass. And then she was gone, the darkness collapsing into ordinary shadow. The chapel was silent. Lorraine's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the rosary. Her knees bled from where they'd struck the stone. Ed was pale, gasping, his shirt torn, but they were alive. And somewhere in the far end of the house, a door slammed shut by itself, a reminder that this was not over. In the Conjuring universe, fear isn't delivered in cheap, instant jolts. James 1 makes you sit with it. He forces you to wait, to hold your breath, as if you are locked in the haunted house yourself, knowing something is about to happen, but powerless to leave. His camera drifts slowly down the long hallways, lingers on half-open doors, lets the sound of a creaking hinge hang in the air just a little too long. This is the first stage of what feels like a ritual. The audience is required to endure before they are rewarded or punished with the scare. When the sound finally comes, a slam, a knock, a breath, it feels less like a cheap jump scare and more like a release, the next step in a process. The effect is psychological. You leave the theatre but still feel the wooden floor creak under your feet when you walk home at night. The fear does not evaporate, It embeds itself. No moment captures this better than the iconic clap game. At first it is innocent, a simple family game, children laughing as they guide their blindfolded mother through the house. But under one's direction, the claps transform into triggers for dread. When Caroline hears clapping from the wardrobe, from the basement, from places where no child should be, the audience realizes the game has been hijacked. This is where the escape becomes psychological. The character is still playing, still following the rules, but the game is no longer safe. It's the moment the audience feels trapped with her. The lights go out, the basement door slams, and the sound that once meant fun now means you are not alone. Even after the scene ends and Caroline survives, the viewer carries that lesson home. That something as cheerful as a clap could mask something malevolent. The next time they hear children laughing in the dark, they will remember this moment. One turns architecture into an enemy. The basement is not just a storage space. It is the stomach of the house, a place that swallows characters whole. The camera glides down the wooden steps. The single bulb flickers. Dust dances in the stale air. When Caroline is dragged into the basement, when Ed Warren confronts the demon there, it feels as though the house itself is breathing, constricting, determined to keep its victims inside. In a consequence escape structure, the basement is the final trial. To get out, the characters must descend into the very gut of the haunting. Emerging into daylight is not a full victory. It is merely a gasp for air. The house still stands. Its shadow still falls across the yard. This is the genius of one's staging. The space becomes the antagonist. Viewers leave the theatre glancing at their own attics, garages, and basements with fresh suspicion. Any dark corner could be a trapdoor to hell. And then comes the most powerful weapon, those 5 words, based on a true story. Highest, they are not just a marketing hook, they are a spell. They turn the film into a kind of collective ritual. That title card is the invisible scar left on the viewer. They leave the cinema telling themselves it's only a movie, but the suggestion lingers. What if it happened to them? Could it happen to me? In a consequence. Escape framework. This is the mental wound that never quite heals. The audience may have escaped the haunted farmhouse, but the haunting has followed them home. They start leaving the hallway light on, avoiding looking into mirrors at night, side-eyeing the doll sitting on the shelf. Hollywood understands that this residue is what keeps people coming back. A clean resolution would erase the fear. The true story tag ensures the fear has a life of its own. When the final exorcism ends, when Carolyn is freed from possession and the sun rises, the family embraces. It is the narrative equivalent of reaching the surface after nearly drowning. The audience exhales with them, but the breath is shaky, as if they have just survived something harrowing. This is not a clean victory. It is survival with bruises still fresh. The house is no longer safe, and neither is the world. Viewers leave the theatre feeling as though they have just staggered out of a burning building. The air outside feels too bright, too quiet, and they keep glancing over their shoulders. This is what makes the Conjuring formula so potent. It doesn't just deliver a startle, it delivers an experience of endurance. The audience has undergone a trial and lived to tell the tale, and telling the tale becomes its own ritual. Sharing the scare keeps the fear alive. The liturgy of fear. James Wan doesn't just craft horror, he builds a liturgy, a ritual of fear with predictable beats, preparation, the long takes, the silence, the tiny noises. Intrusion. The entity enters the family space. The game turns sinister. Climax. Possession. Confrontation. The house itself becomes hostile. Release. A prayer. A final cry. A shaft of light. The family reunites. When this cycle completes, the viewer feels both exhausted and cleansed, as though they have just taken part in a dark mass. The fear has been faced, named, and for now, cast out. But the ritual leaves its mark, which is why audiences return for the next chapter, eager to test themselves again. The Conjuring stands out because it does not reset the world to perfect normalcy once the credits roll. It allows resonance to remain. The clap still echoes. The basement door still creaks in your memory. The final prayer may have worked, but evil feels only temporarily banished. This is what gives the escape weight. It costs something. If the fear vanished the moment the lights came up, there would be nothing to hold on to. But when the fear becomes memory, when it plants itself like a seed in the viewer's mind, the film transcends entertainment and becomes a story they carry forward. That is why The Conjuring is not just a haunted house film. It is an ordeal. You enter the house. You suffer through the trial. You escape, barely. And you come out changed, marked by what you have seen. That mark is what ensures you will come back for the next haunting, ready to endure the ritual all over again. The story of the Conjuring universe reaches its most revealing moment when we finally step behind the curtain and see just how much of it was reshaped for the screen. Every jump scare, every exorcism, every cursed doll owes its power not just to the haunting itself, but to the way the story was told. This is where fact meets film, and the differences are as fascinating as the scares. The Enfield case is often called the crown jewel of paranormal investigations, the one that turned ordinary British council housing into the epicenter of a ghost story heard around the world. In August 1977, single mother Peggy Hodgson called the police after her daughters reported hearing knocking sounds on the walls of their home. Soon, furniture began to move on its own. Chairs tipped over, toys flew across the room. Neighbours and journalists witnessed strange phenomena, including one night when an officer claimed to see a chair slide several feet across the floor without anyone touching it. Most famous were the events surrounding 11-year-old Janet Hodgson, who was said to levitate, speak in a deep, rasping voice, and even become the mouthpiece for an entity named Bill. Recordings captured this voice, which some experts said was physically impossible for a child to produce for so long without vocal cord damage. Photographs of Janet seemingly suspended in mid-air appeared in newspapers, fueling the sense that something truly supernatural was happening. But the backstory is not as simple as a haunted family versus a malicious ghost. Skeptics were quick to point out that some of the evidence could have been staged. The photographs, they argued, looked like a child jumping from a bed. The recordings could have been trickery or ventriloquism. Even Janet herself admitted years later that she and her siblings faked some of the incidents just to see if people would notice. The result was a case file full of contradictions, some testimony convincing, some suspicious, all of it messy. Enter Ed and Lorraine Warren. In real life, their involvement in Enfield was brief. They were not the lead investigators. That honour went to Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair of the Society for Psychical Research. But the Warrens did visit the house and interviewed the family. What they saw, they claimed, convinced them that the haunting was real and that demonic forces were at work. Hollywood, however, needed more than a cameo. The Conjuring 2 transforms the Warrens into the emotional and narrative centre of the story. Instead of being occasional visitors, they become the primary defenders of the Hodgsons, risking not only their lives, but their marriage and faith to confront the demon. The messy testimonies are polished into a clear conflict. The family is innocent victims, the demon is the antagonist, and the Warrens are the heroes who must outwit and outpray the darkness. All the earlier clues, the knocking, the levitations, the demonic voice, are stitched together into a single, escalating chain of terror that leads to one cinematic revelation. The entity tormenting the Hodgsons is not just a ghost named Bill, but a far more ancient and powerful demon, Valac. This connection never part of the real Enfield case, reframes the entire haunting. What was once a local ghost story becomes a chapter in a larger cosmic war between good and evil. This is the genius and the gamble of the Conjuring universe. It doesn't merely retell events, it rewrites them so that they fit into a mythology. In doing so, it delivers what horror audiences crave: clarity. In the real world, hauntings are ambiguous. Witnesses contradict each other, and skeptics poke holes in every claim. In the film, there is no doubt. Evil is real. Evil has a name. And evil can be defeated if only you have enough faith and enough courage to face it. Once you see how the Enfield case was reshaped, the entire Conjuring franchise snaps into focus. Every story, from the Perron family farmhouse to Annabelle to the Romanian Abbey of the Nun, is treated the same way. The real events are starting points, but the final product is a myth. Each clue we've been given, cursed objects, haunted houses, demonic names, are puzzle pieces designed to fit together into a shared universe. This is what we might call modular horror. Unlike traditional horror franchises built around one villain, Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, the Conjuring universe offers a toolbox. You can pick up one haunted case file, build a story around it, then move on to the next without breaking continuity. You don't even need to watch Annabelle to understand The Conjuring 2. You don't need The Nun to enjoy The Devil Made Me Do It. Each film is a self-contained ritual, a family under siege, an investigation, a confrontation, a triumph of faith. This modular design is precisely why the universe could expand so quickly. Every object in the Warrens' museum is potential fuel for another film. Every demonic name in an old grimoire could be the next cinematic villain. It is a library of nightmares waiting to be unlocked. And it works because the films share DNA. That DNA consists of 4 strands. The home, the place meant to be safe, becomes the site of fear. The family, parents and children must hold together under siege. The faith, religious ritual and courage become the weapon. The demon, evil takes a tangible form with a name, a face, and a weakness. This shared genetic code means that no matter where the next film goes, Rhode Island, London, Romania, or Mexico, the audience knows what to expect and takes comfort in that expectation. The fear is new, but the structure is familiar. But the story doesn't end when the credits roll. The Conjuring's monsters have escaped the screen and taken on a strange second life in pop culture. Annabelle, once locked in a glass case in a museum, now appears on TikTok, Instagram, and Halloween costumes. Valak's pale face and Predator's grin have been memed into oblivion, sometimes played for laughs, sometimes for jump scares in reaction videos. This might seem like it would kill the fear, but in a way, it keeps it alive. Horror has always had this strange afterlife. Dracula went from terrifying to charming. Frankenstein's monster went from nightmare to sympathetic. And Ghostface from Scream is now as likely to be seen in a comedy sketch as in a slasher film. When people joke about a monster, they keep its image circulating, making it part of the cultural wallpaper. And when they walk into the theatre for the next installment, that recognition kicks in. They already know Annabelle. They already know Valak. The marketing team barely has to work. A single silhouette of the nun's habit, or the sound of a clap in a dark hallway, is enough to make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. In this way, the memes, the costumes, even the parodies become part of the franchise's ecosystem. They turn the scares into shared experiences, something audiences can laugh about together, and then scream about together when the next movie drops. The revelation that these stories are as much myth as history doesn't make them less powerful. It makes them more so. Because myths were never about literal truth. They were about giving shape to our deepest fears and desires. The Conjuring universe does exactly that. It gives us demons we can name, houses we can fear, heroes we can cheer for, and resolutions that reassure us that good can win. Looking back, all the earlier clues line up. The Perrin haunting taught us that the home can be attacked. Annabelle taught us that innocence can be corrupted. Enfield taught us that evil can infiltrate even ordinary lives. And Valak showed us that holiness itself can be twisted into horror. Each case builds on the last, forming not just a series of movies, but a ritual of fear and faith that audiences return to again and again. What do you think? Do you still find Valak terrifying? Or has she become just another pop culture icon sitting next to Annabelle in the meme hall of fame? The Conjuring films work because they tap into something far older than Hollywood jump scares. Across cultures, we have always told stories about haunted houses, cursed objects, and faith tested by evil. These are not just ghost stories, they are rituals. Each film invites us to sit in the dark, face our shared fears, and watch good fight back against the night. The home that should protect us becomes dangerous. The faith that should comfort us is threatened. The innocence we trust is corrupted. And yet, when the ritual ends, evil is named, confronted, and cast out, giving us a strange kind of catharsis. So, tell me in the comments, which haunted case should we unmask next? Should we dig into Amityville, unravel the legend of La Llorona, or open another cursed object from the Warrens' museum? If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The next true story might already be waiting in the shadows.